All right. Hello, everyone. You're going to hear, much like the title would suggest, you're going to hear a lot of the same ideas and themes come up again. And I think that's a particularly exciting thing for me to hear. Many of the things that I'm thinking about and gnawing on, iterated in so many different ways. So again, my name is Idris Goodwin, he, him, his, and I'm broadcasting to you today from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I am the director of the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center at Colorado College, which is located in the unceded territory of the Ute peoples. And the earliest documented peoples also include the Apache, Arapaho, Comanche, and Cheyenne. I also need to send gratitude, mercies, and solidarity to all those who are putting their bodies and health on the line to demand that which this country's documents promise, and those putting their bodies in the line to heal, aid, and educate others in the midst of multiple pandemics. I appreciate the invitation today very much. As a U.S. citizen, a Black man, a father, and a descendant of formerly enslaved people who migrated from the southern states due to all manner of terror and intimidation, which included voter suppression. This theme is very personal and concerning to me. As I mentioned before, I'm a relatively new director of a multidisciplinary venue, a professional theater, an art museum, and an art school, all three of which are closed or have limited access because of COVID. We're part of a college, so there's students milling about, masked and distance, and we're soldiering on, doing the best we can. And we're pivoting like everyone is. Back in March, when things got really real, my mind immediately went to thoughts of the remix. Let me go. Let's see. There we go. So a remix is a verb and a noun. So to remix literally is what it sounds like, to mix again. The second, the noun is that it's a variant of an original recording as of a song made by rearranging or adding to the original. Remixing, as I came to know it, interpreted by hip hop producers and DJs, is connected to the innovations of those first turntablists who transformed record players into instruments. Even beyond the technical, I want to talk about the spirit, the conceit to dig through the past recorded sounds as a means to create new sounds, new things. This is one of my favorite albums, Fear of a Black Planet by Public Enemy. This album is almost entirely made up of sampled sounds. Every Pretty much everything you hear, other than the voices of the lead vocalist Chuck D and Flavor Flav, as well as a few guests, are the only "quote unquote" original sounds. It is basically built up of previously recorded sounds that have been rearranged, taken apart, recontextualized. So the question is what is this, right? But when you listen to it, it sounds like absolutely nothing else. So it is both the remnants of the past, but something completely forward facing. I grew up on heavily sampled and collaged music. I am a child of the breakbeat. Here we have Grandmaster Flash from the West Bronx, one of the innovators of the crossfader, which you see him using. And what he's doing is basically making a new beat out of two of the same records, taking one small part of one small song and going back and forth to create a new beat. A breakbeat is what happens when you break the rules, when you break the pattern, when you disrupt the flow of expectation, when you use the record player in a manner in which it was not designed. Hip hop, a multidisciplinary art form born from the innovative creativity of Black and Brown kids in a post industrial, pre digital American city, invented the remix. They used their lack of resources as opportunities to create groundbreaking new forms of art and industry. They invented the remix, taking old things and making it newer and fresher and more exciting. In a moment where the nation finds itself demanding and fomenting critical change politically, socially, economically, those who have carried the fire sparked by those innovative kids of the South and West Bronx have much to teach us about how to rebuild from the ashes. For the purposes of this presentation, let's think of the arts less as products, objects of commerce, but rather modes for platforming others, for education, for political action, for the exchange of ideas, for building infrastructures. I'm going to reference hip hop a lot, but not really. This is not really about the entertainment industry, the marketing and selling of songs and clothes. I'm focused more on the anthropological, the cultural intersection, the innovators of turntablism, rapping, breaking, aerosol art, etc. I'm more interested in their intuitive philosophies and the core values that birthed the thing that we called hip hop before it entered the factory. But first, I want to go back to the 70s, the 1770s. What you're seeing here is a painting by John Trumbull from 1817, and it depicts the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 in the United States of America. So the American dream, or what I call the American promise, was put together by all these gentlemen you see here who were fleeing in a monarchy. And the promise is that through hard work and perseverance, anyone can achieve prosperity and elevate themselves and their families, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the context is everything. This didn't include everyone. Here's the same picture again, but a documentary filmmaker named Arlen Parsa took it upon himself to put red dots on all the faces of the men who owned slaves at the time of the signing. America was founded on great contradiction, exclusion, and theft. So the pursuit of happiness for everyone who was in that room. And notice who was not in that room. Certainly not the Africans that these people, many of them, more than half of them, had enslaved. Certainly not their wives or their daughters, no children, no young people in there. Certainly no Native Americans or indigenous folks. So this pursuit, this promise was really only made to the people in that room. So for example, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act, you have the Indian Removal Act, you have Jim Crow and segregation, you have grandfather clauses and poll tax that don't allow Blacks recently freed from centuries of bondage to the opportunity to vote. And as I speak now, there are attempts at throwing out votes, as it was referenced before by Paul. There's a thing called voter suppression, even in 2020. So really what we're still dealing with is the same contradiction, truth, but contradiction of what the American promise is. It's a promise that was made to a select core. And we still see that, and we're still fighting that now. So naturally, resistance came in all forms. So despite centuries of systemic exploitation, abuse, and exclusionary practices aimed at those not inside, made it clear that the promise was only to its authors. Over time, hearts and minds evolved to expand who was allowed inside, but it did not come without bloodshed, struggle, resistance. And that resistance was fueled mostly, and many times, by speeches, by poetry, by song, by theater, all forms of the arts. Which brings us to the Bronx. I know I'm jumping ahead many centuries, but again, you know what we're talking about is a lineage of expression from marginalized people, and more specifically in this instance, those of the African diaspora on the North American continent. So the Bronx in the late 60s, early 70s was on fire. Neglected, broken apart by an interstate, ignored. And in the midst of that, still, you had these children who were repurposing. Still expressing their joy and their insistence to thrive and exist against a crumbling infrastructure, but not solely with benevolence. Martin Luther King Jr. says that a riot is the language of the unheard, which is why in 1977, when the New York City blackouts occurred, many folks took advantage of the city's vulnerabilities. And in addition to clothing stores, food stores, liquor stores, etc., many record stores were also looted. And shortly after, hundreds of DJs, new sound systems popped up all across the West and South Bronx. Uh, while it is true that ill-gotten means were utilized in order to get these new things, they took it to the parks, they took it to the public, they took the equipment outside, and gave music to the people. Jerry-rigged uh, light posts to get power, and shared with the people. Created break beats, took them apart in order to give space for dancers and poets to express, in order to create spaces where different gangs could commingle peacefully, and build and create a new thing. In this setting, you're seeing an intersection of the sound clashes of Kingston, Jamaica, against the post-industrialized South Bronx, against street gangs who infuse existing forms with an urban polycultural sensibility, the Western couplet of English poetry reimagined by the footwork and Southern drawls of Muhammad Ali, James Brown, advertising fonts and large-scale lettering, the turntable itself repurposed to create new out of old, pop art, Basquiat, Debbie Harry, vinyl, the death of vinyl, the rebirth of vinyl, the invention of the crossfader, white flight, the flattened cardboard box, Martha Cooper, linoleum, spray can etiquette, the irony of Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight, the crack cocaine epidemic, Reaganomics, sampling, drum machines, beat machines, and the b-boy stance. And let's again remember the same radical exclusionary tactics that we saw depicted in the painting also was trickling into the art world as well, which had really built itself around preservation, requirements within the space being money, education, etc. So the remix hip hop culture defies a notion of ownership, defies a notion of preservation, finds a way to hold both preservation and innovation and access at the same time, acknowledges the past and the history, what's in the crates, but also understands the dire need for evolution. The remix reminds us that constructions are imagined before they are built, and deconstruction is the breaking down. Reconstruction is the rebuild, but the remix is about integration, a return, but also taking the parts that are best to allow others to fully and publicly and three-dimensionally be themselves. This is my message to any and all who represent those not represented in Trumbull's painting. Your task is to be fully, publicly, three-dimensionally visible and publicly alive, and in celebration if you can. Lucille Clifton writes, "Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed." I want to read you all something, because I'm first and foremost, much like Tally mentioned, I'm certainly not a political scientist. I'm first and foremost a writer, a creative, and but I do think that what voting suppression speaks to is an attempt to erase um, uh, certain individuals. And so for me, art is about the insistence to exist, the insistence to be seen and heard. This is a piece called Taken, from my book, Can I Kick It? The Takers, talking about take some country back because all they know is take. Took lands from the indigenous, took the Indian and saved the child, took the profile, the headdress, the names, the prophet, took Africans, took the Bible, made it a noose, took the cross, set it blazing, took Japanese, took Semitic lives, took limbs of poplars, adorned them with bleeding ornaments, took pictures, took time to hear the case, heard the case, took it to the furnace, hid ashes under the bed, took the sheets off and cut eye holes, take and take this, take that, took jazz, blues, dance, moves, dap, dab, made him cornball, whack ass, Pat Boone, Elvis, Vanilla Ice, Justin Timber take, took publishing, took credit, took up all the space, all four walls of the library, took all the gunpowder in the cannon. And when we took samples for our raps, you took us to court. When it's you who took the cookies out the cookie jar, take that, take that, take that. Take our leaders to the grave, take their visages, dismember, distort, appropriate their message, use their message to sell this, sell that, need to take a seat, take a step back, but you can't take it in the dark. So you cry about taking when all you do is take this, take that, but we won't be took, hoodwinked, or bamboozled. We can't be taken to the river and told not to drink. We are hungry, never thirsty, special set of skills. All of us won't be, cannot be, never again taken. We are still having to say Black Lives Matter. We are seeing in Native and Indigenous communities the legacy of violence, neglect, and theft. We are seeing the effects of who is not in the room when that document was signed. The insistence and resistance to trouble the American promise is urgent and critical. To blend hip hop's promise of community in the conversation, platformed by the philosophy that radical access and inclusion is key to democracy, and to rob anyone of their vote is like pulling the plug out of the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idris. It's really sounded as a manifesto from the beginning